Previously on Ninjago.
I'm not sure how many people share my disdain for one-shots, or if anyone really ever thinks this hard about them. Like I said at the beginning, they certainly have their place in many competitive games, but they fall into the same place that mechanics like stuns or silences do, which is that they may be fun for the person wielding them, but for the victim, it's an entirely different story. That XQC clip of him getting stunned into oblivion in Overwatch 1 comes to mind. These gameplay elements have to be handled carefully, because if they become too oppressive or pervasive, it can drive people away to play something else. Do you like playing video games? Do you like being able to move around?
I've forgotten how to walk.
You've forgotten how to walk.
Yes.
Do you enjoy shooting at enemy combatants? Do you have fun using cool character abilities?
For his neutral special, he wields a gun.
Wouldn't it be absolutely awful if there was a gameplay mechanic that took every single one of those things away simultaneously? If you said yes to all of these questions, you may be entitled to financial compensation in the form of free V-Bucks sent by Mr. Beast himself. To get started, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and Mr. Beast will show up disguised as your DoorDash driver. This bit is sponsored by Grubhub. This fucking sucks so much. This is really the best I could come up with. Alright, enough beating around the bush. Getting stunned in any video game sucks ass. No other way about it. Losing all control of your character so you can do nothing but watch as the enemy tears you apart is nothing short of infuriating. Unless you're the one stunning others, in which case it's great. At least with getting one shot, the misery is over instantly, instead of having to endure a brutal beatdown while you're forced to watch. On the other hand, unlike a one-shot, being stunned isn't always a guaranteed death, whether it's because you're at high enough health, or your opponent is unable to properly follow up on the stun, or maybe your team intervened and managed to rescue you. Despite those possibilities, you yourself are still completely at the mercy of whatever happens until the stun wears off. And that's assuming you're not about to be stunned again. So, if this gameplay mechanic is so frustrating, why does it seem to exist in some form in nearly every game out there? That is the question I aim to answer today, as well as give my seasoned take and reason to take for how stuns should be handled to minimize frustration and ensure that they feel as fair as possible. And, believe it or not, I started working on this video before I played Deadlock for the first time, so don't think that was just the sole inspiration for this, though it certainly moved it up the docket a few steps. So, let's stun lock someone for over 10 seconds.
Okay.
Dodge those hooks like it's the Matrix, and don't forget to buy Reactive Barrier. This is how it's made. There's only one place to begin, and it's explicitly defining what a stun is in video games. While most gamers will be able to recognize that completely losing control of your character is called being stunned, I think there are a lot of people who mix up any sort of CC with stuns, and some may not even know what CC even means. So let's make everything crystal clear. I'm talking Heisenberg levels of crystal here. Everything that will be discussed from here on out falls under the purview of CC, aka crowd control. It seems to be a touch unclear where this term originates from in video games, at least from my research, but in real life it refers to managing large groups of people, whether that's like an event for a concert or, a big protest. CC in video games means any sort of displacement or disruption effect you can do to someone. Note that these do exist in games outside of player versus player, but I'll solely be focusing on stuns in PvP games. Also keep in mind that I'm only going to be using a few games as an example for these stuns in CC because they have a lot of them, but the things I discuss within the video could still be applicable to the stuns in CC in outside games. Like, for example, Call of Duty has technically stuns and like the shock charges and flashbangs and whatnot, but it's very, very minor, and like the way you counter it is just putting on tactical mask, whatever the hell that perk is called. So, still applicable, but not what my focus is going to be on. Anyway, the debuff that crowd control applies can mean any sort of debilitation effect that limits an element of gameplay. The element that gets hindered corresponds with the term that is generally used to describe the CC, though it is important to keep in mind that different games may use a different name for what is essentially the same effect. For example, in Overwatch, Sombra applies a debuff called Hacked, which briefly prevents any usage of character abilities. In a lot of other games, such as Deadlock, the same debuff of not being able to use abilities is called a Silence. not to be confused with Silence in Dungeons and Dragons, which is a spell that completely nullifies any sound in a space, but doesn't necessarily prevent abilities unless they need to be spoken. My point here is that as I go over the variations of CC in games, I will endeavor to use the most well-known term applied for each, and we'll try to include the common alternative names, if they exist. Like I said, crowd control encapsulates everything I'm about to list off. To start, we have disarm, which is the inability to use your weapon, whether that's because you were forced to drop it, or it becomes temporarily disabled. You can still use abilities and move around, so the debuff is only really an issue for characters that rely on their powerful weapon to get the job done or defend themselves. Note that there are lighter versions of disarm that reduce weapon damage, fire rate, or accuracy, but obviously none are as severe as straight up disabling your gun. Next up, we have silence, which, as previously mentioned, prevents you from using abilities, but still lets you use your weapon and move around. These two can be annoying, especially if you're in the middle of an important team fight, but typically they don't leave you defenseless for long, assuming you aren't hit with additional CC. The same cannot be said for the rest of the crowd control types that have to do with restricting movement. First is a simple movement speed reduction, simple but quite frustrating in the heat of battle, especially if you get several slows stacked upon you, so you're moving at a snail's pace. A lot of other CCs will have a slow built into it. The next effect goes by quite a few different names depending on the game, such as Hinder in Overwatch, Earthbound in Rivals, or Grounded in League of Legends. In some cases, it applies a movement slow, but the primary and consistent element is that the restriction of movement abilities, which can serve to line up a quick and easy kill on characters that are normally quite slippery. Since the debuff only affects movement abilities, the target being hindered can still be a threat, or get away once the effect wears off. The step up from being grounded is immobilized, sometimes known as being trapped. Rather than hampering move speed, immobilized holds you in place for the duration of the ability, and also typically disables movement abilities so you can't just get out. Though it doesn't always mean you're held in place the whole time. Sigma's ultimate in Overwatch technically applies the immobilize effect, while also throwing you into the air and slamming you back down. In any case, being immobilized is much more dangerous than slowed, as even the worst players will have an easier time landing shots on a target standing still rather than one moving ever so slightly. A different variation of immobilized is being snared or tethered. Rather than being kept from moving at all, being snared lets you move around, but only in a small area until the effect is over. Inversely, another type of CC is any displacement effect that forces your character to go in a direction or place that you do not wish to go. In some cases, that means being pulled into enemies, like the ever-present hook ability on characters that want you to be close to them, or being pushed away, seen on characters that would rather have you stay away from them. There's also displacement that throws you in the air to make you an easy target, or alternatively take someone in the air and immediately bring them back to Earth, or just, knocking someone around. Many of these displacements come with additional CC, such as being stunned while getting hooked, or the immobilize from Sigma's ultimate that I mentioned. Which is a great segue into mentioning that pretty much any and all CCs can be mixed and matched together, or specially integrated with other abilities that make it seem like its own thing. The Curse debuff in Deadlock is nearly every CC combined minus Immobilize, so the only thing you can do while under its effect is slowly walk around or throw out a melee attack. Magda's ult from Overwatch is really just a big snare, with a shield around the edges so anyone not caught in it will struggle to help those inside. Lastly, before I move on to the actual stuns, I neglected to mention some debuffs that some may consider CC, but I don't because they don't actually reduce control of your character. One such example would be blindness. Sure, it makes fighting more difficult and your targeted abilities are heavily restricted, but you can still run away or fight back if someone gets close. Other debuffs like vulnerability, making you take more incoming damage, or anti-heal make you easier to kill, but again don't fall in the category of restricting actual control of your character. Being anti-heal doesn't make lining up a one-shot on you any easier. And sure, some people might say disarm falls into a similar category, but again, disarm is something that takes away, you can't control your weapon now. I guess you could say blindness, you can't control your eyes, but I think we're getting into the new niche nuance. It's just, yeah. So now we reach the stuns in their various forms. It may seem like the type of stun is irrelevant, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Sure, in some cases, getting hit with any of these will result in your death, but there are just as many circumstances that have different outcomes due to the stun that was applied. The basic stun is as advertised. You may as well let go of your controller or mouse and keyboard, as until the stun is finished, there is not a single thing you can do that will have any response. No movement, no abilities, no shooting, no maidens. Sit back and watch the Reinhardt prepare to charge you into a wall. I bring that up specifically to mention that just because you are stunned doesn't mean you aren't also being moved around. I spoke on being hooked earlier as another stun that also happens to displace you, but you could also be moved by other things outside of the ability stunning you, whether that's being moved closer to enemies or a clutch save of a teammate pulling you to safety. That brings me to the second type of stun, petrifies and banishments. I group these together because the defining difference between a regular stun and these ones are that you cannot harm the stun target until the effect wears off. There are some notable exceptions, or there can be depending on the ability, but in general, while petrified, you are not going to be subjected to the same beatdown that you would if it was a regular stun. Well, not until it's over anyway. Banishment is in a similar boat, where you cannot participate in the fight, but you are technically safe. Note that banishment comes in many forms, like Hulk's exile ability in Rivals, or Doorman sending you to parkour land that will have a hefty punishment for you if you fail to make it to the end. The defining effect here is that the few ways you might be saved from a regular stun are now less likely to work, as even your own teammates cannot interact with you until the effect is done, while the enemies can begin to surround you to prepare for your imminent demise. In some cases, the Petrifier Banishment will just be a glorified stun, like at a big team fight where there isn't time to prepare a wombo combo on a player coming out of the effect. In other cases, the Banishment can be a disservice to the team, like using it on another player about to die, which gives them some lease on life and time for their team to swoop in to mount a rescue. I hear Paradox. Paradox right here. No, you fucker!
We both have the same plan. I'm sorry.
Why? No, why would you all on her anyway? We're on a 1v. No, okay. Okay, let's review. You're all. I wouldn't want you to use your ult even if I didn't have mine, because we can't kill him while he's in there, and it gives time for the nearby person to come help. Clearly, someone hasn't seen my video I haven't released yet, where petrifies are worse in some situations than sleeps. Not my teammates, because I'm high-key ass, but in higher ranks for sure. The next type of stun are sleeps. Like petrifies, sleeps function identically to regular stuns, but with a couple key differences. When a character is put to sleep, it functions exactly like a stun, though in some games they might be able to move around a little bit, but nothing else. That is, until they take any amount of damage, which wakes them up quickly thereafter to regain control. This makes sleeps technically less frustrating than a flat-out stun, since you can't be beaten senseless while you wait for the stun to finish, and the enemies can slip up by waking you up too early, allowing for your escape. On the other hand, being put to sleep can still easily lead to your demise, as it gives opponents plenty of time to set up a kill. Or, they leave you alone for the entire sleep duration, which makes it then just another long stun, something that can be quite devastating if you're about to make an important play to win the game. Just like with banishments, sleeps can vary in how they are applied, and how long they last, but generally they follow these principles. Before I move on, I want to quickly touch on freezes. I initially had them as another type of stun, but the more I thought about it, they didn't really have anything that separates them from any other type of stun. It's game dependent, of course. In Overwatch, Mei has to build up her freeze on you with her ultimate only, or through one of her perk options late into a match. In Rivals, the various freezes act like sleeps, where the freezes ended early upon being damaged. Deadlock has a freeze through one very specific item that acts as a very brief stun, so it doesn't really need its own category, rather it kind of exists in all of the rest. Okay, I know that was a lot, but you got through it, and I'm proud of you. Now let's turn our attention towards why stuns are important for a healthy player versus player ecosystem. Because yes, even though they are annoying, they do serve a few purposes that actually do make a game better. For one, and I would wager this is why stuns in CC become more common as a game exists, they serve to rein in high mobility and fast movement. Most games over their lifespan almost always become played at a higher pace, especially in higher skilled lobbies. Why? Well, it's a combination of going fast usually being the best strategy, and more movement-based abilities coming out with new characters, otherwise known as power creep. How do you stop this new tank that can always roll around at top speeds? Throw a flashbang and watch them stop in their tracks. Spider-Man swinging from spawn to your backline in 2 seconds? Better freeze him in place before he immediately gets away. Mina's about to escape every single ability you throw at her? Not if the slowing hex has something to say about it. Counters are a natural part of any game. But the issue is that more counters get added alongside mobility, therefore making it possible to have more CC overall on the same team. And I kinda get why this happens. If Cassidy was the only character with the ability to shut down fast-paced heroes, not only would it become mandatory to play him, anyone not playing him is banking on the one guy who is to do it well, or the entire team suffers. By giving a new hero like Mizuki his own snare ability, now a support character can counter mobility, and the need for a Cassidy is reduced. Hero variety goes up, Bob's your uncle. Of course, that's all just in theory. What actually happens is that a player doing well on their favorite high mobility character immediately makes the entire enemy team swap to characters with CC, to which the first player makes a Reddit post about it. It's hard to think of a way to alleviate this problem, but I'll talk about that in a moment. Another purpose that mainly stuns serve is to be a big, powerful action to sway the tide of battle. There are plenty of iconic ultimate abilities that can render an entire team helpless, and it fills the power fantasy of whatever character you might be playing. But it's not just ults that use stuns to sway the tide of battle. A few characters have a powerful stun in their pocket that can define games, like Anna's Sleep Dart. Again, it does suck for the people in the other team to be subjected to these abilities, but for an ultimate ability, or regular ability on a long enough cooldown to only be used once per fight, it's more than worth the annoyance. Plus, it can help make abilities that are channeled to be more powerful because having interruptions for them allows for the game to be balanced more around these abilities that are super strong. However, the issue once again comes back to these abilities being all too frequent, or at least a lot more frequent than necessary. Ultimates having team-wide stuns is fine because they don't happen as often as regular abilities, but even that can have problems depending on the game. The next purpose for CCs are to give certain characters defensive options to make diving them less appealing. Sometimes these are given to support characters, other times it could be like a DPS that wants to sit back a touch rather than charge straight in. This also extends to tanky characters that can wield powerful stuns if you decide to get too close, therefore serving as more of a deterrent. That in turn can let the tank make more space for their team, like an Emma Frost walking forward in her diamond form, which makes the other team question if they should risk engaging her where she can chokeslam them, or yield some room to wait out the cooldown. Both the defensive option and deterrent are super important roles for stuns to play. But, stay with me this time, the issue is that as more characters are added with such abilities, the more potential for stuns and CC to pile up on a team happens. Do I think stuns are serving these purposes? Of course, I just laid out some examples where they work exactly as designed. The real question is, should they serve such purposes? Or should game developers find different things to fit such roles? The answer to that is, unfortunately, probably not. Reining in high mobility options is critical, and the only alternative is to not add characters who possess such crazy movement. But the opportunity cost of having cool, fun characters is far too high. And if you haven't noticed, gamers are craving for more and more speed in their games. Replacing awesome ultimate abilities that stun teams is difficult, because at a certain point, what else can they be besides a giant area that deals damage? Alright, from here on out, everyone gets Mario's Final Smash for Smash Bros. Now, no one is happy. The same is true for defensive options / deterrents. If someone isn't backing off from a character due to a stun or other CC, the only other thing that can really dissuade that urge is, again, big damage. Sure, you could have some more cases like Brave's Whip Shot or Invisible Woman's Push to keep threats at bay, but that's unlikely to be anywhere near as effective. Despite my grievances, stuns are doing their job, as well as the other forms of CC that exist. The real killer is, and always has been, how they are implemented. If you saw my video on one-shots, you know I broke down how oppressive they feel based on 3 variables: the frequency, the ease of hitting them, and your counterplay options. I feel like the same formula could apply for stuns, however, I'm not going to do such a hard analysis for several games. Instead, what I'm going to do is take a look at how some games that possess many stuns go about making them feel fair, and how some games that haven't can go about improving their existence. Because just like with one-shots, I have to concede that stuns are not going to go away, and they will always suck to have inflicted on you. But what I can suggest are ways to make it suck just a little less. The first obvious solution would be to reduce the overall amount of stuns and CC that are available in a game, or if you happen to be developing one, avoid including too many abilities that include CC. Seems like a no-brainer, but remember that a game wanting to add more characters to an existing pool is going to run into the issue of needing some of them to also have CC, or they may struggle to replace the current heroes that already have them. One way to get around that is to make it so needing such crowd control isn't strictly necessary. Again, it's only going to work so well unless the game elects to restrict their design to a slower pace. It's kind of how a lot of FPS shooters, like, tactical shooters in the CODs and Battlefields operate. If you're looking for an example of this solution being put into practice, look no further than when Overwatch made the transition to Overwatch 2. I've talked about this before, but several notorious characters that people complained about being too strong with their stun were altered in some manner to alleviate people's concerns and also reduce the overall CC. From that transition to the present, where we are back to Overwatch 1, Mei's primary fire freeze is locked behind her tier 3 perk. Bridget's shield bash only stuns during her ult. Doomfist was made into a tank, so him possessing a stun is more valid. Cassidy's flashbang now only hinders rather than flat out stuns. And of course, the switch to only having one tank means that the tank characters can have more CC overall in order to establish a clearer identity between tank and DPS. And if we take a look at the new heroes added, it's pretty clear the devs are sticking to their philosophy of not overdoing the new CCs. Out of the 5 new heroes released for the reversion back to Overwatch 1, neither DPS had any CC. The new tank can only stun by pushing you into a wall if you get close, and one of the supports got a snare ability that has a pretty short range. Of course, there's the fucking cat who can stun with their ult and drag an enemy around for a bit, but that's just the exception that proves the rule. Compare that to the first 5 new heroes in Overwatch history. Ana had the super powerful sleep dart, Sombra could silence with an ability and her ult, Orisa had a strong pull ability, Doomfist had a stun plus several displacement abilities, and if you skip the next hero Moira who had none, you got Bridget, who was solely responsible for the worst meta in Overwatch history, thanks to her shield bash stun. Overwatch stands out as an example of how a game that ends up slipping into the doldrums of CC hell can work their way out for the sake of a better game experience. Of course, there are still moments that make you feel like you're being put into a blender, and there are team comps that can have a lot more CC than others. Before I move on to discuss how that issue might be tackled, I want to compare Overwatch to another game to emphasize the difference of stuns. Though, I'm just having a tough time picking a game to compare it to. There's just so many options out there. None of them are anywhere close to how Overwatch... Okay, yeah, you know what the game's going to be. It's Marvel Rivals. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, so I'll just point this out. Not only does around 80% of the roster have at least one CC effect, there are some characters with upwards of 5 or more ways to displace, stun, and overall annoy the hell out of their enemies. Furthermore, Rivals does things backwards from Overwatch, where the characters with the most CC utility happen to be in the DPS category, rather than tank or support. Rivals is a much more chaotic game than Overwatch, with insane amount of heals and movement that actually make securing a kill much harder, therefore necessitating the crazy amount of CCs. To begin to reduce all of the CCs could be nearly impossible without reworking several fundamental aspects of the game, which I have serious doubts will ever happen. So what could Rivals do? The next method for reducing the pain of stuns would be to make them harder to hit, or at the very least, harder to hit for abilities on shorter cooldowns. I think Ana's Sleep Dart remains the pinnacle for the perfect stun to skill ratio for its effect. Not only is it a skill shot of a projectile, it has a brief wind-up, making it just a tad harder. And of course, your team has to make sure not to wake the sleeping target too soon, or it will be for naught. And either way, the cooldown for the ability is long enough that you will only get it once or twice per fight. Additionally, the ability makes such a distinct sound that you can relay to your team when it has been used, so now you can go in. On the other side of the aisle, Luna's Snow Freeze ability used to have a similar wind-up to Sleep Dart, but for some reason was changed to be instantly cast, which, if you can't tell, goes in the other direction that I'm trying to outline here. Not all CCs need to be ultra skill shots, but unless it's an ult, the severity of the CC should scale with how hard it is to land. Ultimate abilities being massive stuns or CC is fine, since they have a pretty long cooldown, and many of them will have a bit of wind up so players can react. Of course, you can track the ultimate so you know when it's coming. Counterplay is naturally another way to keep stuns from feeling too frustrating, but there's a glaring issue with balancing excessive CC with just counterplay, and that is the scenario where you get utterly stun locked. No avoiding anything when you completely lose control of your character for upwards of 10 seconds. I believe that ultimately, getting stun locked is what truly sets people off, especially if it happens somewhat frequently. Not only that, but generally this happens in one of the most pivotal fights in the match, as everyone is as strong as possible and has saved their ults and whatnot for that moment. If you can't afford to reduce the amount of CC, and the CC that exists is already decently balanced around being able to hit the opponent with it, there's only one thing left to do to reduce the pain of excessive CCs and stun locks. Make it so consecutive stuns are less effective when they start to pile on. The inspiration for this actually comes from a non-PvP game, that being the Darkest Dungeon games. In Darkest Dungeon 1, the meta for a long time was to bring heroes that had the ability to stun multiple targets every round, which, if executed properly, meant that unless the enemy had good stun resistance, you could clear entire dungeons without the enemy making a single attack. How did the developers choose to balance this? Well, it wasn't to gut the stun attacks, it was to simply make it so anytime a character gets stunned, enemy or ally alike, they are granted a heaping amount of stun resistance until the next time they are allowed to take an action. The first stun gives them 50% stun resistance, and if they manage to get stunned again, another 50 is added on top for 100%, and so on. It's such a perfect solution, and yet it's elegantly simple. I believe such a mechanic could and should exist in games that incorporate numerous stuns, but rather than making it so characters have a chance to not be stunned twice in a row, instead make consecutive stuns far less effective until a person hasn't been CC'd for a brief window. Now, imagine to my surprise as I was writing this script to find that Deadlock, one of the games that incited me to make this video, actually does have such a system in place. Kinda. Currently, the system is that every sequential stun in a row grants a 10% reduction in the stun's effectiveness that caps out at 30%. This sounds pretty good, until you remember that in the late game, stuns can last over 5 seconds, and there are so many ways to inflict other CC as well in between. Alright, enough belly aching. I'm gonna round out this video by sharing how I would fix stuns in Marvel Rivals and Deadlock, since they're the two games I kept going back to dog on. I don't believe there is any current issues with CCs in Overwatch, outside of potentially giving the tank role an additional passive of making CCs less effective. It already exists with things like Ana's Sleep Dart not lasting so long, or Mei's Freeze perk taking longer to take effect. Hell, you can make one of the new sub-roles be for dive tanks like Ball or Doom to gain increased resistance to movement locking abilities. As for Rivals, I think they should also grant tanks knockback and stun resistance, but also make it so any character that gets stunned or movement locked gets a couple of seconds of major stun reduction, excluding ultimate abilities. If they do get CC'd again before the reduction wears off, the reduction is amplified even more and the timer resets. I think this balances the need for CCs to secure kills on fast characters while also increasing the skill required to pull it off. If you need 3 stuns to kill a Spider-Man, he deserves to have a chance to get away. Deadlock has the most potential for ways to alleviate their stun problem. Part of the game's issue already is that the counters for stuns exist at minimum. You have debuff resistances, but those can only take you so far, and the one item that can prevent being stunned, that being unstoppable, only lasts for several seconds on a minute-long cooldown. Meanwhile, the enemy Dynamo has a 5-second ult that he can cast twice thanks to the refresher item, so good luck countering all that when you need to stand next to the patron so it doesn't die. For one, completely separate to the stuns problem, Refresher should definitely have a cast time, similar to the one they gave for the new egg item. That way, chaining your own stuns becomes a lot more difficult. As for the stuns and CCs, I have 2 proposals. One is to increase the stun reduction on consecutive hits to extend to any type of CC. If I get silenced by Mina's ult, I should not have to suffer the full duration of silence getting thrown through Paradox's wall or the item silencer as well. My second proposal is to add an upgrade to Reactive Barrier, which currently stands as the only true item to try to counter being stunlocked. This improved version would have the same effect, but now also scales the barrier given to you with every stun you receive in a short time. Ideally, it would scale high enough that you are incredibly difficult to put down if you are stunned 3 or 4 times in a row. That's all, folks. I don't have much more to add, outside of quickly stating that between one-shots and stuns, I will take more stuns in a game every time. While one-shots can always feel cheesy at some level, a well-implemented stun ability, like the constantly mentioned Sleep Dart, can do a lot to make a game feel more interesting. Above anything else, like I said in the previous How It's Made video, it all boils down to how developers choose to implement these mechanics in a game. Doing it wrong risks great dissatisfaction from players, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out what happens next. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and like. That's not how you say that. Don't forget to subscribe and like. See ya!